The movie opens with kids down in the basement, someone walks above them, and they are trying to hurt their mother. The scene shifts to a little kid named Charlie, sleeping in his bedroom. He wakes up to check his window, but there is nothing. When he looks at his window again and sees a shadowy figure, he goes to sleep with his mom Kristen. The scene shifts to a library, where Mike's phone runs out of charge and he comes home to find his sleeping wife and son. He puts his son Charlie to bed, but he wakes up. They have a chat about Halloween, and Mike promises to carve a pumpkin with him the next day. Charlie also asks for his dad to check outside his window, and it is all clear. Mike goes to sleep with his wife. The scene shifts to the next day, which is Halloween. Mike is at the university giving a lecture on literature, while students are in costume. At the same time, Charlie is in his pirate costume waiting for his dad. He shows his mom the painting he did of the shadow figure he saw on his window. Mike visits Hannah, where he sees a relic with Latin letters on it. He shows his acceptance letter from the university about the extension of his tenure. Hannah is happy that they will work together for longer. Mike leaves Hannah's office to meet with his son, but he can't find a taxi and decides to take the metro. Charlie and his mom are out on trick or treat in the busy streets of New York. He sees a big vulture on the roof of a building. He tries to show his mom, but the bird is gone. Meanwhile, Mike arrives home, but only finds a note and not Charlie. Now it is dark outside and Charlie is done with trick or treat. He is on his way home with his mom. He asks to go to a Halloween festival, but his mom rejects it. Mike comes out of the house in his cowboy costume. Charlie insists on visiting the festival, and Mike offers to take him. He tells his wife about the acceptance, and since she is happy, she lets Charlie go to the festival. Later, Charlie and Mike arrive at the festival. Charlie is recording everything on his dad's shoulders. Charlie spots a figure in the crowd with his camera, but it suddenly disappears after pointing at Charlie. Mike apologizes for not making it on time for pumpkin carving and offers to get some ice cream together. While they are walking in the crowd, people get in between them, and Mike warns Charlie to stay close in crowded places. Charlie sees the vulture again and asks Mike to pay the ghost, but Mike brushes him off to pay for the ice cream. Mike realizes Charlie is not beside him. He runs through the crowd and hopes to find Charlie, but he only finds his hat. The police officer suggests looking for him at his house, since it is near the festival area. He runs home, but Charlie is not there. Mike and Kristen desperately go back to the festival area to look for Charlie. The vulture is still on a building column, gazing at the crowd. Police come to the festival area and inform Mike. When he comes home, he finds officers leaving his house and his shaken wife. Kristen prepares Charlie's lunch as if he is not lost. Kristen faces the truth of her son's disappearance and storms off to her room, leaving Mike in tears. The scene shifts to witching hours. Mike wakes up hearing voices around the house. He checks Charlie's room, and Charlie stands right behind him while looking out the window. Charlie asks him if he also sees what's outside the window with a dull face. When Mike looks again, he sees a shadow charging towards him. This was all a dream. The scene flash forwards to a year later, 3 days before this year's Halloween. Mike suddenly wakes up from his dream. He looks at his wall of investigation on his son's disappearance. The scene shifts to Mike putting flyers of Charlie on the street. He thinks he heard Charlie calling for him. Mike calls Kristen, but she hangs up. Later on the day, Mike gives a lecture, and during the break, he takes coffee with Hannah at the campus. They talk about Charlie, and Hannah tries to motivate him. After class, he stops by the police office to drop off his new flyers of Charlie. Mike has an intense talk with the detective and blames the police for being lazy. He leaves the office empty-handed and continues to put up flyers. He finds a stick on the floor, and he sees Charlie on a bus. While chasing the bus, he almost gets hit by the taxis on the street. When the bus finally stops, he gets in, but he cannot find Charlie inside. When he gets off the bus, he sees the same bird Charlie saw. It leads him to graffiti that says "Pay the ghost," which was the last thing Charlie has said to him. He gets inside the abandoned building to find homeless people inside. He asks them about the graffiti, but nobody answers him. A woman's crying voice comes through, and they all covered the fires inside. A blind man explains it comes around at Halloween. Mike is confused, and the very same man that gave the order to cover the fires takes him to a wall covered with the saying "Pay the ghost." A figure appears and disappears behind Mike, but since the homeless man is blind, he can't see it. The scene shifts to Mike and Kristen in a cafe. Mike explains that he remembers Charlie saying "Pay the ghost," and asks if he has ever said something like that to Kristen. She has a breakdown about him not protecting their son, and she leaves. At night, Mike watches the video Charlie recorded a year ago at the Halloween festival. Mike thinks he saw something unusual, a visual of a house. Meanwhile, Kristen wakes up because she hears voices coming from downstairs. Suddenly, Charlie's scooter rolls in her direction and falls. The next morning, Kristen visits Mike at his house. He explains to her that he thinks missing children on Halloween are all connected, since they were never found, unlike kids that disappeared on other days. They decide to reach out to other families that lost their children to gather more information. They visit a man who lost his daughter. He reveals that his daughter also said, "Dad, can we pay the ghost?" The man tells his story, and the Lawfords realize they are experiencing the same events. Mike calls the detective for his theory about missing children on Halloween. Even though the detective doesn't take him seriously, he goes through the database and gathers information on never found kids on Halloween. The detective finds a case where the girl, Mia, mentioned a phantom before she disappeared. He visits Mia's mother, and she tells the detective that she thought she saw her missing daughter last night. As soon as she says what Mia last said, the stove in the kitchen catches on fire, because she also mentioned paying the ghost. At night, while the Lawfords are at home, the electricity goes out. Mike looks out to see 3 children with bags over their heads. All of a sudden, those 3 children catch on fire. When he turns back into the room, he sees a room full of children in Halloween costume, but they disappear when the light comes back on. Mike explains what he saw to Kristen. The very next morning they hire a psychic. She notices the window's uncanniness. She tells them about an entity that has all the children with it. Suddenly the door gets shut and the window opens. The wind coming from the window throws the psychic to the wall, where she passes away. The detective comes to their house and gives them a speech. At night while Mike is awake, Kristen sleeps upstairs. She wakes up to find the drawing Charlie made a year ago. But now the drawing has Charlie behind the shadowy figure. Mike carefully goes upstairs after hearing voices. He finds Kristen on Charlie's bed, rocking herself. When Kristen turns around, she isn't herself, it is Charlie who speaks. He asks Mike to save him. Then Kristen turns her head, and Mike finds her trying to harm herself. There is a mark carved on her arm. When she wakes up, she doesn't remember anything. The scene shifts to a morgue, where a doctor is examining the psychic's body. Dust comes out of her mouth. The next day, Mike and Kristen are researching the mark on Kristen's arm. Hannah is helping too. They find an ancient event that took place near the Church of St. Joseph. Every year, Celtic people gather there to celebrate Halloween. Meanwhile, the doctor examining the psychic's body shows Detective Jordan that she has been burned on the inside. At night, Kristen and Mike visit the church's location, and they witness the ritual they have. Meanwhile, Hannah is doing research on the Celtic goddess in ancient writings. A schoolteacher stops to answer their questions, and she recognizes the symbol on Kristen's hand. The symbol represents the maiden and the crone. She tells them about the Samhain Day and Crone, who could have taken their son to the other world. Crone is a ghost, and the payment is children according to old belief. She also explains that a door between 2 worlds stays open till Halloween night at midnight. Mike remembers the woman's noise he heard at the homeless shelter. Hannah finally finds out about the story of the witch. While Hannah tells the story of that night, the scene shifts to Halloween night of 1679. Annie Soquin was mobbed by the villagers while she hid her 3 children in the basement of her house. They were found by the villagers and were put to eternal sleep. Annie swore to return every year and replace her children with 3 living ones. The scene shifts to the birds attacking Mike and Kristen's taxi, causing them to get hurt along with the taxi driver. Meanwhile, Hannah sees an entity at the university, and it pushes her out of the window. Mike runs across the festival to get to his son, while Annie gazes over the crowd with her birds. He gets to the building he saw the graffiti before, but nobody is there. The blind man he talked to before shows up. In exchange for his watch, he takes Mike to the portal within the building. The blind man gives him a flashlight, and Mike starts to cross the bridge into the fog. When he touches a girl he sees on the other side, he has a flashback of Annie's execution. Mike arrives at Annie's old house. He takes a look at the basement where she kept her children. He finds a stone with the same symbol carved into Kristen's arm. When he flashes into the room, there are dozens of children dressed in Halloween costumes looking back at him. He calls for Charlie, but every single one of them raises their hands. Mike starts to walk between them to find his son. Charlie holds his hand. They head outside the house while other missing children, Mia and Pablo, join them too. When they are on the bridge, when Annie shows up in front of them, other children that were in the house take their phantom forms and attack Annie. They spin around Annie and take her away. The bridge starts to collapse. Mia and Pablo make it to the other side safely, but Mike holds onto the side while also holding Charlie, who is hanging in the void. Mike pulls Charlie and himself up. The door closes immediately after them. The scene shifts to Mike and Charlie coming home. Kristen hugs him, and they are all happy. Charlie doesn't remember anything but the fun he had at the festival. A vulture flies from their house to Hannah's body. The movie ends as Hannah opens her eyes.